I'm Kim Gladden, Director of Discipleship, and I want to welcome you to today's discipleship conversation. We're going to be talking today about community discipleship. And that means a lot of different things to different people. So I'm hoping that you will join us in the chat room and be part of this conversation today. Today we have two pastors who are with us who are going to talk about community discipleship in their context. We also have some resources to share with you. And at the end of the program, I'd like to give you 5 fall discipleship cohorts that you can join on your journey. My guests today, which I'm so happy to welcome, Dan Walker and Bernie Haddad.
Thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here. Dan is a pastor with years of experience in community discipleship and the former director of Love in the Name of Christ. Bernie Haddad is the founder and director of Mercy Unleashed Compassion Ministries.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
love that. I love the ring to that. Mercy
Thank you.
Unleashed Compassion Ministries. So I welcome you both to today's discipleship conversation on community discipleship. In our 5 discipleship prompts, we mentioned that discipleship is intentional, relational, holistic, multiplying, and lifelong. And so when I think about today's conversation, I start thinking about our Wesleyan motto, where we say that we are transforming lives, churches, and communities. It's right in our motto, and communities, through the hope and holiness of Christ. And so today we're going to be focusing on what does it mean to do discipleship in community, and that comes out of a holistic understanding of discipleship. So Dan, I think let's start with you.
Great.
What does discipling the community look like in your context? Tell us a little bit.
So I think key to that is that we moved to a new context 2 years ago, actually in July in 2017. And so we moved from Florida to Marion, Indiana, a small town community. And so really these first 2 years hopefully will look very different from future years. But there was a lot of listening when we first arrived in Marion. First listening to the Holy Spirit, but then also listening to the community. And really what flowed out of that was a focus upon the shalom of the city, peace, prosperity, the overall welfare of the city. And so prophetic lament was the first time that I really dug in and started reading Dr. Sun Chan Ra, and it really exploded this understanding idea of what it meant to be in the community and to be looking for the welfare of the city. And then most recently, I read Eldon Villafañe's book, Seek the Peace of the City. And really the beginning, I didn't know it 2 years ago, but the beginning of his chapter, he gives a real simple 3 steps of how to seek the peace of the city. And it's presence, peace, and prayer. And so as I look at that now, back over the last 2 years, really for me, being present, discipling the community started just with presence. Listening. When I arrived, it was who in the church is leading the way in the community, and when can I sit down and talk with them, and then ask them who else in the church and who in the community has the voice and has been there. And so a lot of listening to the community that then flowed over into visiting other pastors, visiting other congregations, and just being present, trying to soak in what God's already been doing way ahead of when Joanne, Adriana, and I arrived in Marion. And then the second one, moving towards peace, where those conversations led to invitations to join the advocates. And really that focused around 2 things, really advocating for racial equity and for economic equity in our community. So I ended up in council meetings, I ended up in conversations and mediations and committees, and just being present in the community to start to join those who are already seeking that equity. And then finally prayer, which I think is the one that I probably did the most by myself and not in the community, but still was able to do a lot in the community, joining other churches in praying community. And like our city has a council, a prayer meeting in the city council once a week. And so I was able to join some of those early on. And so that really has been what community discipleship has looked like for me over the last 2 years.
Recap those 3 P's, because sometimes that alliteration just helps us to remember.
So presence, peace, and prayer.
And prayer.
Yeah, presence, real simple. And if you haven't read Eldon Villafañe, Gordon Conwell, he's been in Gordon Conwell for years and was a pioneer in the field of education across cultural bounds. And his multiple books, but Seek the Peace of the City is a great one.
That's an amazing book.
Yeah, it is.
I have read that.
Awesome.
It's an amazing book.
You know, one of the things that is really interesting for me, you were saying your context now is Marion, and I've been to Marion a number of times, but I'm usually on speed dial or speed direction to one or two locations. And I happened on one of my trips to get lost. Well, it's not surprising the way I drive. I saw a side of Marion that I had never seen before. I saw a side of Marion that I didn't know about. And so when you talk about the three Ps, I think that might be true for many of us. We perhaps have our attention or our energy or our activities might be in one part of a city, and there could be a larger context.
Yes.
So I saw that in Marion, and I was kind of shocked. I'm like, where am I?
Right.
Yeah, Willie James Jennings, in his commentary on Acts, he says that the church should be at the place where people are asking, why are you where you're not supposed to be? And I do feel like we have been stuck in the places where we belong.
Absolutely.
And that what we need to do is, Bernie, what you're doing, going to places where we don't belong, because that's where Jesus has already gone ahead of us. And he's calling us to follow and lovingly serve with him in those places as well. There's danger in that. And I say more danger sometimes to the community we're coming to try to love than to us, though there is dangers for
Right.
whoever the us is who's trying to cross a boundary. But I really loved what Willie James Jennings talks about, that, you know, people should be asking, why are you here?
Right.
I love Willie James. I did a whole course with him, and it's mind blowing.
Yes.
It was mind blowing. But when you talk about, I want you to talk for a minute about what are some of the shifts, because we're saying be in community, but it doesn't always come naturally, and sometimes people don't see that as a part of our discipleship. That's an optional piece. But what are some of the shifts that would be required in order for us to say that we're joining Christ in community?
Great, and let me say, I think these are shifts that have hit me over the last 2 years, and I think may have value outside of what God is speaking to me. But the first one has been, you know, I've been an ordained minister for almost 20 years now, and in pastoral ministry before that. And really, it's centered around the pastor for me. And so one of the things that God has been doing in me is moving from a clergy-centric and a local church-centric ideology or model for ministry in the local context to what I would call a familia-centric model. And so in Marion, there is my local church, my local congregation, the Greater Wesleyan Church, and then there's the rest of the body of Christ.
Right.
So Joanne, who's Puerto Rican, my daughter, Puerto Rican as well, that La Familia model, like she has cousins everywhere, and if you're not related by blood, you're still
Never a stranger.
spiritual son, a
Right.
spiritual, I mean, every town we go to, there's a spiritual aunt and uncle, there's somebody there. And you know, I think about that in Marion, like when we go beyond the doors of our church, beyond our denominational doors, I feel like if we could move to that understanding that individual out there who is a follower of Christ with us, they're spiritual cousins. Some are a little more distant than others, some are close, but they're all part of the family. They're all the fam, right? And so that piece of shifting from that clergy-centric and local congregation-centric to the whole familia in a community, I think will do a lot to bring the true presence of the kingdom of God and the true presence of the church. And then the second one, and this also comes from Dr. Soong-Chan Rah and Dr. Villafañe, but really Villafañe highlighted this idea of moving from proclamation, the preaching of the word, which is really centric for the evangelical, for the Wesleyan church, the proclamation of the word on a Sunday or Saturday, Sunday weekend, to moving to what Jesus did, which was proclamation with demonstration. He spoke, and then he healed, and then he delivered, and then he fed, and it was like this really holistic model. And so I think if our words matched our demonstration, there would be so much difference in the community for us, that there would be a community discipleship taking place. And then the last one, and this has been really an eye-opener for me, and that is moving from mono to multi. I've always had a heart for multi, but I never understood the damage that mono does, and how hard it is to move from a mindset of mono to multi. And so particularly, I think ethnicity across racial boundaries, across generational boundaries, moving from really centric on marriage and married to married and single, all of these changes, moving from a male-centric to a male and female, which is bread and butter for the Wesleyan Church, but
Yes.
sometimes it's easy to speak about and harder to live out this idea of gender equity in ministry and in life. And so really for me, that it took a shift of moving each of those three areas, moving out of kind of the place we've been that has had good stuff that has happened and some bad stuff that has happened, and starting to shift to new models, not changing the gospel, not changing the message, but sometimes changing how it's in lived out and enacted in the local community.
Kind of noticing the other.
Yes.
Noticing
absolutely.
the other. When I hear you talk about that, and it is a shift because, in our churches sometimes we have a culture that we're just comfortable with.
Right.
And that phrase, we've always done it this way.
Yes.
And we've always had this program, or we've always and so in terms of a community, thinking about community discipleship. What I hear you saying, and Bernie, I don't know if you hear this too, but what I hear you saying is that we've got to begin to expand our vision, or notice who is there or not there.
Yes.
And so I hear you saying that shift. One of the shifts would be to begin thinking. That's not always comfortable. People don't like shifting.
Well, you have to be uncomfortable. Like he was saying, once you stay in the church, you're so comfortable, everything is so familiar, and that's how we've always done it this way happens and becomes key to the congregation. But getting uncomfortable, Jesus was continually in uncomfortable situations. His disciples were continually in uncomfortable situations, and that's what we have to do.
But that that sense of having to go to the uncomfortable to be in community could be an obstacle in some.
It is.
I want to talk for a minute about obstacles to community discipleship. I've had, actually I had somebody from my own church say, hey, Pastor, this is my safe place.
Right, I've heard that.
So this is my comfort place. And what they were trying to tell me is, I don't want anybody else here who's going to make me feel uncomfortable or make me have to deal with other things. This is where I come. This is for me. And so there are some obstacles, even as we begin to think about this shift towards thinking about community and seeing community. What are some of the obstacles that you're thinking of in terms of when we talk about actually being in community?
Yeah, I think that comfort is the number one for me, and
Absolutely.
it's particularly in a North American context. The comfort of the church and the difficulty to move beyond the life that we have built around us to
Yeah.
go past that. And I'm the first to say, I need a place where I can be comforted, where I can be supported, where I can be encouraged. I don't face a lot of trials, but when I do, I need help. And the body is there for me. But there for me to be able to go back out into the uncomfortable places, to go back out into the I came not to be served, but to serve with Jesus, right? So I think that's the first obstacle is overcoming comfort for me. And the second one, and this is particular to me, but I think it's also particular to church ministry, and that is, I think we have fallen into a Messiah complex in ministry. So, my dreams for ministry was building a big church, doing great things, and so the next thing you know, God calls you to go, to give, to live, and my dreams translate that to I'm coming, here I am, look at me. And so moving away from that, and the way I have tried to fight against that is, particularly in coming to Marion, is not starting my own thing, doing my own thing, but instead looking for consensus, hearing the voices that are already there, joining, partnering with, collaborating with. So if that is not there, then for me it is really falling into the pridefulness, the Messiah complex, that really I think a lot of us have to fight. Some of us don't, but a lot of us have to fight. And our culture really affirms what good ministry is, and it looks like a lead who is successful doing great things. And so we have to fight that obstacle constantly. And the last one that I've seen over the last years and really fell into is you build an organization to empower and release, and next thing you know, you're spending all your time sustaining and preserving that organization.
No one releases.
Right.
Right.
So I think fighting that tendency to end up in organizational preservation that ends up where you're now fundraising to keep the doors open, to build the new building, to do that, and the new ideas are you're starting to, so overcoming that obstacle of turning inward to preserve the organization or to preserve the us, I think is a huge obstacle keeping us from being present in the community.
We're going to be talking a lot about this issue of community discipleship. So I'm just inviting you to come on into the chat room because I know you have questions and comments. We want you to be a part of the conversation. One of the things that we've acknowledged here, and I think it's so important to say, is that it is uncomfortable. We've said that, we've said up front that this is uncomfortable. It may be against the historical pattern of a church that we've been, but where do you see like the biblical mandate? Where do you see the biblical motivation and impetus for this?
I see it in Revelation. Revelation is at 7:5, where it says that the Lamb is at the throne, and around him are people of every nation, every tribe, every language. The Wesleyan Church, one of our founding principles, beyond the Bible, of course, is social justice. And making it so that we are comfortable with one another and that we don't acknowledge each other by the way we look, but by our hearts and our love for Jesus. So as pastors, I personally think if you're a pastor or if you're a Christian who is strong in their faith and you are very much a proponent of mixing it up on Sunday morning, go to a church where you don't look like everyone else. I attend a church that is 100% African American except for me. And as white as I am, I stand out. And it can be uncomfortable. But you know what? You can't preach it if you're not willing to walk it. You have to lead by example as leaders of the denomination, as leaders of the church. We call for discipleship. We call for community involvement. We have to live it. We have to live it.
Yeah, I agree completely. And along those lines, we started the whole Jeremiah 29, seeking the shalom, the peace of the city. But also, it really comes back to our core for me. We look at what are the greatest commandments? Loving God and loving our neighbor, right? Yeah. And then somebody who's smart was, smart or not smart, we're like, Jesus, who is our neighbor? And Jesus gives an example of our neighbor that's not the person next door, not the person who looks or acts like us or who's accepted, but really it's someone across a boundary again. And so I think some of our core ideas or core call as followers of Christ call us to live out a community discipleship, to love neighbors beyond our neighborhood.
Absolutely.
And I see this as a part of when we talk about the 5, being intentional about your discipleship, being
holistic,
relational, but being holistic.
Absolutely.
Multiplying and lifelong. Sometimes we, just like with the love languages, they're ones that we like, okay, well, that one's not as important, or I don't do that one. But Christ calling us to that multi-dimensional aspect of discipleship. And I think when I think of it that way, sometimes I just get hit over the head with the words.
Oh, yeah.
When he picks up the book and starts reading and says, I've been called to give good news to the poor. I've been called to open blinded eyes and set captives free. Wow. And so right along with holiness, with evangelism, with multiplying churches, building churches, right along with that, I see right in the midst of that is also our call, to be holistic and to reach community. But I recognize also that for some, this is an area of growth or an area of exploration, an area that, hey, we're still, discerning what that means for us. So Dan, I wonder if you could have or give us some resources, someone who's, maybe exploring, okay, what does it mean when I start to turn towards this holistic aspect of discipleship, and I start to turn towards community, because we want to make on-ramps so that everyone, because again, not everyone, this is not an on-ramp that everyone is taking or wants to take. What if someone wanted to just say, how do I get started thinking? I'm not ready for any big steps yet, but how do I get started? Maybe even thinking, praying, reading about this area. Dan?
So, Kim, before I jump into that, and just to follow up with what you talked about with one of your members talking about a safe place, and
Yes.
this holistic idea, I think a starting place is to recognize that this path to joining Jesus, to being His ambassador, to dying to yourself, that Christ lives in you, that you are joining Him in that Isaiah text of bringing sight to the blind and healing and setting captives free. All of that for me is the place of abundance,
Yeah.
and the place of greatest community. So it's I feel like your friend came from this, like, I need to have a safe, healthy place for me, so we can't live mission. We can't disciple the community. For me, this is a deprived and isolated and unhealthy place to only be within a small community. But it is in truly living out and joining the church, the whole body, in living that out in a holistic way, that we have the fullest community. It was when his life was on the line that Paul was rescued.
Absolutely.
By his brothers and sisters. You know what I'm saying? And so in that, I find lots of danger, lots of risk, but the fullness of life that so many of us are dying for. God, I want more. And He has the more for us if we can
Yeah, it
step
just
out.
doesn't look like what we thought it would look like.
Yes. And so for me, it goes back. I started with, Holy Spirit, what do you want? You change something with us. So maybe some of you are in a season of change or in a place of asking God. And it started for me in the little front room of our house in Marion, where it was weeks of just listening, praying, sometimes silence, sometimes reading, sometimes praying. But it was listening to the Holy Spirit and then starting to listen to others as God directed. And then the second place I would recommend starting to connect is in books. And I think we have a book resource list available.
We
So,
do provide it, Dan.
Yeah, so there's some great books. I've mentioned some of them already today. Every time I talk to somebody, I find about another resource. We are resource rich right now. And so I would encourage you to connect with some of those resources. Some amazing folks like John Perkins, who's been doing it for decades. And then also some younger leaders. I personally just spent some time with Jonathan Brooks. He's Pastor Jay up in Chicago, and read his book, Church Forsaken. But some great books to start with. And then the last thing I would say, and it's coming up in just under 3 months, we're going to be back at CCDA conference in Dallas this year. And so if you're excited about some of this stuff and wanting to learn and understand more, join us at CCDA. It's Christian Community Development Association. It's really practitioners and educators across the nation who come together once a year, really live it out throughout the year, but then come together for an annual conference. And it's going to be 3.5 days out in Dallas together, really digging in together to some of that. And Kim, I know some of us have come over the last few years, and I just want to mention that at Wesleyan Church Leadership, we've been continuing in conversation with CCDA leaders, with Ava, with Mark, and others over this last year since the last conference. The conversation has been rich and good, and I want to encourage, if you want to join that conversation as well, really there's an open door for joining that conversation, that you can reach out to Kim or to myself, and we'd love to have you be a part of that conversation as we're moving towards Dallas this year as well.
I'll be there.
Great. Fantastic.
I'll be there too. Hey, listen, we've got some rich conversation going on in the chat room. Let me just read something.
Awesome.
Because we as Wesleyans, we come from many different places. And this comment says, social justice is a quasi-political construct that is more interested in doing nice things than offering Christ. So how would you, this is someone, that's their legitimate feeling. How can we respond in love? What would you say?
I would talk about biblical justice. Oftentimes, people talk about different aspects of what social justice is: racial equality, trying to help with the mass incarceration problem, trying to help with all of the inequities that people are talking about. But I think that the biblical justice there is that Jesus was continually in situations where he reached out and he had relationships with people that were not the people expected him to be with. That he always was reaching across the aisle with the women I mean, how many women did he use to teach us incredible things in the Bible? I know what this person is saying, and I understand it. And we live in a very toxic environment right now, especially with social media, where things are flying around and people think more about themselves and their experience, and it's difficult to see the whole picture. And I pray that through the work that we're doing, and when we get to talk about what I'm doing, I pray that through this work, we can do better, and that we can help people understand what we need to do, what those next steps are.
You know, I think for me, when I think about it, I think about say that term, just, you know, because you just say those words, and for some it's like a trigger.
Yeah.
But let's take away the term, and let's just talk about what does it mean to love God and love neighbor. And
Well, that means you love everyone.
oh, everyone?
Everyone.
Oh,
You
I'm supposed to love everyone?
You love your gay neighbors. You love your Muslim neighbors. You love the immigrant at the border. And you want to help these people. You love people who don't look like you. You love people with different skin color. You love people who hate you. That is what we're supposed to do. And when we talk about people, you had mentioned that when people come into church, it's their safe place. And, well, where are all those other people supposed to go to church? So we have all these Christians out there. Maybe they have too many tattoos for someone's church. Maybe they're gay. Maybe they've got these situations in their lives where they're seeking God, but they don't have all the answers. Well, what church are they supposed to go to if they're not welcomed at our churches? Where do we send them?
There is that dynamic tension of,
Absolutely.
of I think lifting up the whole, because we lift up the love, but we also lift up holiness. We also
Absolutely.
lift up evangelism. We also lift up outreach. And I think one of the things we've been trying to say in discipleship is that it's not either or. It's not one or the other. It's all and that our discipleship journey includes elements.
Right.
To be holistic, to be whole, to be encompassing. It includes elements so that we're not siloing off. But now I want to turn, Bernie,
Yes.
since I'm looking right at you, bring you into this conversation also. Your ministry work is in transforming prison communities.
It is.
Here's some sobering stats put out from the Lausanne movements. I just want to read a couple of these that just was like, oh, okay. More than 731,000 adults and youth are held in our jails. Mm-hmm. And that makes a mission field, they put out these stats, of more than 3,000 local jails, which would be almost having one in practically every county. The stat, 56% of men behind bars have experienced trauma. And then for women, 98% of the women behind bars have experienced trauma. And the one that I really didn't know was this last one. 1 in 28 children have an incarcerated parent.
That's true. More sobering statistics, an even larger mission ground. 2.3 million people are incarcerated in the United States. That includes prisons and jails, 2.3 million. 4 million people are on probation in the United States. Of all of the world prisoners of the entire world, 1 in every 4, 25% of the world prisoners are in the United States. That is an incredible, sobering statistic to me. 2.6 million children have at least one incarcerated parent. Matthew 25 talks about the sick, helping the homeless, feeding the hungry, visiting the prisoner. Well, if you lock up dad for a drug offense or whatever he's done, you lock up dad, maybe dad was the breadwinner, now mom has to get a job. Maybe they can't afford their house anymore. I mean, Matthew 25, it just totally just covers up all of prison ministry. With the reentry, the people who are left behind, it's incredible. It's just such a good mission field. Just the harvest is rich.
What I want to know, Bernie, is how did you come to be in this ministry? How did that, we're talking about community discipleship, how did you find yourself in a community of prison?
Yeah, it was totally God. I would have never guessed, and people who haven't talked to me in a year would have never guessed that I would end up in the prisons. That was never my plan. My plan was to be an attorney, and then God called me into ministry, and then I didn't know why, and I found out last November it was to be inside the prisons. And so through a weekend at Kairos, Kairos is a prison ministry, and through a weekend in Kairos, actually a lady prayed over me and prophesied over me and said, "This is what God has intended for you." And I was looking for a transition from the position that I was in, and I started Mercy Unleashed. So we started it in December of 2018.
So you're new.
Oh, we are brand new.
You are new.
But God has opened, I mean, the doors are not just opening, they are flying open. God has shown us so much favor, and I do believe it's because we're walking in obedience.
Tell
We're
us
doing
about
it.
the context of your ministry in the prisons. Tell us about the context of that.
So what we do, right now, we're only in the male prisons. So we're trying to get into the female prisons in Indiana, but right now we're in the male prisons. And so what we do is we go inside and we teach discipleship. So our ministry seeks out Christians who are already there. A lot of prison ministries, they go in and they evangelize and they seek out people who don't believe yet.
And the prisoners have been saved so many times.
Exactly, and the prisoners have been saved.
One more.
You know, in some ministries, we know we're bringing Jesus in.
Yep,
Jesus is
he's
there.
been there.
He's been there. He's there. So we go.
Ministers are there too.
Yeah,
It
the
just needs to be
ministers
built up
and
also.
a lot of the offenders, they're
ready.
preachers.
Yeah.
They are dynamic preachers. But so we go in, we seek out the offenders who are already Christians. We invite them into our program. I do a discipleship program based on the Banding Together book. And I had the book personalized for Mercy Unleashed. For those of you at home who are using this program, ours does not have the spiral. It had to be specially bound this way because inside prisons you can't take spirals because they're weapons, right? So it's a totally different outlook on things. So once we're in there, we divide them into groups. We do weekly discipleship, and we're there every single week. It's consistent. I've got volunteers. We work with the guys, and we see major, major movement of God.
So you're doing discipleship.
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 Not just crocheting.
Oh,
hankies.
no. And I am preaching, and we are doing discipleship, and I am teaching, and we're inside the cell blocks. So you talked about how sometimes this uncomfortable can also be dangerous. We're actually beyond the walls, inside the cell blocks. So where I'm standing and I'm teaching and I'm preaching, out there we've got the day room, which is where the guys are sitting, but out there we've got cells. We have open bathrooms. There's no doors in prison except the cell doors. So we've got all that they do is right there.
Wow.
We are in their house. And I think that makes the big difference, frankly, because we're in their house. We came to them. We seek them out because God seeks them out. And it's just been an amazing experience. We have had people that have come to Christ and joined our discipleship group because they wonder what's going on. What's this group? Why are all these women in here? And they come and they join our discipleship group. We've had conversions from Islam to Christianity. We've had people be able to restore relationships with family members, with children, and all through discipleship. God can do amazing things, so we shouldn't limit him. If drug dealers can be inside the prisons and locked down 23 hours a day and still run a very successful business, God can use these men, equip them, and raise them up to be spiritual leaders of their home. And that is what he's doing. He has always used the most unlikely of characters to do his work. The broken, the women, the people that other people wouldn't talk to. That's who he uses. And I believe that he is going to do great things inside the prisons.
Awesome.
That's exciting. Exciting to hear that discipleship is happening.
Oh, yeah.
On a deep and consistent level.
Oh, yes.
Using some of the same materials that we use in the church that
Yes.
is happening in the prisons. What are some of the obstacles?
Well, one obstacle that I have is it's very difficult to get men to volunteer for this ministry. My husband explained it that you've got men on one side who are really fascinated with prison. He said you don't want them. On the other side, you have Christian men or men who are of faith but are a little hesitant to go in, and he said, they don't want you. In the middle, there's a few men, and those are the guys I'm looking for, who have an interest and they're also believers, and they'll go in with me. So I've only got 2 men that are helping on a consistent basis. But inside the prisons, they're so thankful for whatever can come in, whomever can come in, that being a woman is not an obstacle, which is amazing. And another obstacle is a lot of people who want to serve inside the prisons are because they are ex-offenders themselves. They're Christians, they're ex-offenders, and they want to go in and help. And there are rules about that. There are rules. We do get ex-offenders to go in with us, but there's all different kinds of rules that we have to abide by. And then just security, you have to be approved, and that's a process.
What about stigma? I'm going to bring something up because I know a church from some previous life. But anyway, the Angel Tree, you've heard of Angel Tree?
I have, through prison fellowship.
Yeah. And some people feel like, well, hey, they're in prison, they deserve to be there, and
Off with their heads.
I don't want any help. I don't want anything made available to them. They
shouldn't have done what they did.
Yeah, they're
yes.
just getting their just desserts.
And that is why the ministry is named Mercy Unleashed. The word mercy to me means giving somebody what they need, not what they deserve. And we have to unleash that mercy. The United States, on a whole, I don't find to be a very merciful population. We are a very off with their heads. Crime is crime. If we lock them all up, then we won't have crime. Well, that's not true, because a lot of people are locked up for things that aren't huge crimes, and then they learn bigger crimes on the inside. Right now, we're talking about discipleship. The thing is, with discipleship, we are always being discipled, always. And we are always discipling others. It's just, what are you teaching? What are you taking in? What are you teaching? And when you're in prison, you're being discipled. There's all kinds of people in there who want to teach you things. How to be a better criminal, how to join a gang, how to know Christ. So we have to bring that in and teach true discipleship in a biblical way. And so that's what we do.
And I think this also goes back to what our friend posted, the question about social justice as well. Really, for me, a turn happens when I start hearing of la lucha, the struggle of the individuals, and then join them in their struggle. And when their struggle becomes my struggle, then I'm a little less judgmental of, like, they deserve it. And I'm more understanding of, like, the struggle is hard, the struggle's real. And so it moves for me from a social justice or a prison politics, and how do we look at that, to a loving those individuals and looking at the systems because they're affecting those individuals. And so really, it's, for me, is the rubbing shoulders of those that are hurting, those that are struggling, those that are in la lucha, that then changed and continues to change my mindset towards an embrace instead of a standoff, and they got what they deserve, kind of, or they need to be receiving this.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't know what you don't know. So if you're born into a situation where your parents are hustling on the streets, and that's the profession that they do because that's what they know, then that's what you know.
A family business.
It's the family business.
Yeah.
That is what you know.
Yeah.
You don't know anything else. You don't know what it looks like to live in the suburbs and to go to a nice school, and that's just foreign to you.
Bernie, what are some of the fruit that you've seen? As I think about this whole concept of discipling community, there are just so many different places where back to loving. And it doesn't mean excusing or ignoring or covering over, but loving. There's so many points where this can be seen. But what are some of the fruits you've seen from your discipling?
Well,
and what's on anything you want to tell us about that's happening that you just want to share? Or?
Yeah. The fruit has been really good. For example, one of the purpose of discipleship, is go forth and make disciples, is for it to multiply, so that I'm not the only one in there making disciples. So my guys that we work with, they are multiplying. So when they're not with me and our volunteers, And they're discipling their cellmates. They're discipling at their jobs that they have, and most prisoners have jobs. They're discipling, so that's growing. That's how we're getting new guys in. Here is an amazing story. We had a guy that was inside one of the facilities where we're at, and he received my book. He was at one of the classes, and then he got transferred to a level 1 facility, which means he's getting ready to get out within a couple years. So several weeks ago, I started getting emails from people I did not know that said, my son is in this facility and someone has this book and he's talking about discipleship and my son doesn't know what that means. Can you help him? I received 2 emails from 2 different moms. So I responded back and said, technically, because we can't have relationships with their family members. So I told them, I said, I have to refer you to the chaplain. So they contacted the chaplain. Then the next thing I know, I have an email from that facility.
Awesome.
And now we're in there.
Awesome.
Wow.
And we met with those guys for the first time last night.
So you're multiplying.
We're multiplying.
and you're doing being intentional, relational, holistic, multiplying.
Yes.
For some of them, lifelong.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's the thing.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it is lifelong,
Yeah.
and maybe their cellmates aren't lifelong, so they're continuing to multiply. They're continuing to grow and mature, and we walk alongside them on their Christian walk. Other good fruit is reconciliation with family members. I've got one guy who was really upset that his kids won't talk to him. They won't talk to me, they won't talk to me. And we told them how to write letters. When you write a letter, don't talk to them about you so much about, I'm so sorry, why won't you talk to me? Rather, write a letter that's more light. Here's 20 things about Dad that you didn't know. And now he's getting a response.
Awesome.
So they're easing into it. Their job, even if they're offenders on the inside, their job is still to love God and love people. And part of those people are their families. Men are called to be spiritual leaders. And we help to equip them to do that.
You're saying that they're doing that from the prison?
Yes, I'm actually holding a conference inside a prison in January where I'm focusing on discipleship and discipling your family from beyond the walls.
Awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Love it.
Bernie, that's great.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. So they can parent, they can influence, they can lead. They don't have to be right there, but they can do it. They can be involved. So that's what we're doing.
That's some great fruit. As we talk about this, I just want to bring a quote. I read something about, as we talk about this concept of community in discipleship. I'm all excited now just listening to the 2 of you. But I want to get a response to you both from this article. It was from Crew, and it was an article on community discipleship. And here was a quote. It says, America today is a nation of individuals, and this impacts the way we live, think, and believe. This worldview deeply affects our faith, for individualism is an understanding of the world that has as its epicenter the individual soul. In other words, for Americans, the most important thing is the individual, not the community, which is perhaps why Mother Teresa referred to America as the most socially impoverished country in the world. She could see no visible community. So, wow.
Yeah, that's big. I don't know that it's wrong. I think one of our issues, even within the church, is we're very individualistic. What does this program do for me? How's your youth group?
For me, yeah.
For me,
Like a consumer.
Yes.
Yeah, because the whole rise of people taking their families. We go to one church for youth group, we go to one church for worship, we go to one church when we want to do the Bible study. So we just kind of set a menu out of what's our, for me, what's
we were
my...
we were created to be in a relationship with God, but we're also created to be in a relationship with one another. That's why the fellowship is so important. That's why the early church in Acts, it grew by 3,000 members that one day, because they came together in fellowship. They shared everything. They ate together. We need more of that in the United States. And I think we can learn from other cultures, frankly, that are more family-based, more community-focused.
Yeah, and I think beyond do we need to change our cultural directive, I think asking the question for us now, like, how do we as the church start living differently? And it honestly will take intentionality.
Absolutely.
It's going to take much more intentionality to break beyond our smaller circles, our family circles, our little boundaries. And that is stretching, which seems to be a common theme for us
Right.
today, of stretching ourselves beyond what is comfortable and beyond what is comes naturally to us. But in going beyond that, we connect with people in a deeper way. So I think it is going beyond those to choose to hang out in the garage instead of on the back porch, to go out into the community, to spend time where you're crossing paths with others intentionally.
Well, you know, this has just been a really a good conversation, just to get us thinking about the whole idea of community and community discipleship. I want to end. I always do this rapid fire thing, so I'm going to ask you real quick.
Perfect.
All right, Bernie, what's a disciple?
A disciple is someone who uses their sphere of influence to spread the word of Christ.
Great, like that. Dan, what's a disciple?
An ambassador and follower of Christ.
Okay. What's your best discipleship trip? Tip.
Relationships.
Okay.
It's all about relationships.
Dan?
Relationships.
Okay. We got a consensus from the two of you on that.
From that completely.
Absolutely.
If we try to disciple outside of relationship, we're in trouble.
Great. Well, there's so much more that we could talk about, but I hope that we have at least kind of just stirred some things in terms of your interest in thinking about what is God calling me to do in community. There was this cliche they used to ask, and I hated this question, but they would ask, if your church disappeared from your community or closed down, would anyone notice? Would it matter? And so I think what it was trying to get at is that where is the sphere of influence? Where does your church have influence? And I just remember one of the things that we did in my church. We had a ministry to a nursing home, and there were so many times I just wanted to cry because people were so lonely and so they're just sitting in there waiting to die. This was not one of those nice homes with all kinds. This was in a very challenged neighborhood, and so as we would go in, one of the things that made me cry was this woman. She had dementia, and she was trying to describe to another woman who we were, and she says, "You know them," and she got her name all wrong, but she said, "They're the people who come love us." And I thought, oh, that just warmed my, so I said, well, so that would be an example of a pocket if we didn't do that, or if we weren't there where people would miss, and so this whole idea of community, and then us acknowledging that, yes, it's messy, it's uncomfortable, it's challenging, but God calls us.
If there's any group of people who can go in love, it's got to be the church. It's got to be us, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I fully believe that part of the, to use more biblical language, part of the new wine and new wineskins that God has given us is going back to some of that core, going out and loving our neighbors and living out that love as Christ and with Christ.
We love because he first loved us.
He first loved us. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Bernie.
My pleasure.
I promised
Thank you,
that
Kim.
I would tell you, I'm excited just to list for you now, tell you about 5 discipleship cohorts. So we've been saying you don't have to go it alone. Join with other pastors and Wesleyan ministry leaders. And we're excited to announce 5 new discipleship cohorts that are coming up this fall. They're on our website. You're going to be able to register in August, but they're up there now. You can see. Let me just tell you about them. And they're aligned with our 5 discipleship prompts. So intentional, relational, holistic, multiplying, and lifelong. So we've kind of put one under each. So our first cohort is John West. You've heard that name. He's going to be doing Mobilizing Disciple Makers. And if you're familiar, that's the book that Bernie was talking about, that she's using. And he is going to have a 4-week laser-focused training cohort on unpacking the process for multiplying and making disciples in any context. And then we have Tom Crick, excited that he's going to be doing our relational cohort, and he's going to be doing his cohort on small group ministry. And so Tom is new to the Wesleyan Church. He was a former pastor at Saddleback, and he was over their small groups. So if you know anything about Saddleback and their 850 or 1,000 small groups, Tom is the person who was doing that. And he's bringing to us, making available to us if you're interested in establishing and strengthening small group culture, Tom will do that. Our third cohort is going to be Dan Walker, who's here with us today. And Dan's going to be doing a book study on prophetic lament by Soong Chang Ra. And this is a wonderful way to just kind of introduce yourself, to say, hey, this is an area I want to do some reading. I want to do some learning and growth. And so Dan's going to lead through that book study. Our fourth cohort, fall cohort, will be led by Megan Cusimano, and Megan's going to be talking about multiplying in community. And so she's going to be sharing, how do you make those relationships with schools and with government and civic organizations in your community? Megan's going to share in a 4-week cohort how to make those relationships. And they've been successful even in a small town in upstate New York. And then our fifth cohort, it's going to be jointly taught by myself and Dave Higgle from our communications division here at headquarters. We're going to be looking at the emotionally healthy leader. It's an 8-week cohort, and we'll expose you to principles from Pete Scazzaro's Emotionally Healthy Leader book. We've designed this specifically for Wesleyan church leaders to look beneath the surface at issues of uniquely Christian leadership. So we'll explore what it means to survive stress, to plan for planning and decision making, building teams, creating healthy culture, exploring the shadow side of your gift. Every minister has a gift, and that's wonderful. But then there's the other side, the shadow side of your gift. So we'll be exploring that. So I want to invite you. You want to take this one? Yeah. Are you not afraid to face your shadow side? Don't come in unless you're willing to face that shadow
I'm afraid,
side.
but I'm willing.
Okay, I'll take that. All of them are great. So here's my challenge to you. Pick one. Join us. They're all by Zoom, so wherever you are in the country, and we've heard from some folks outside of the country, some of our other Wesleyan family, they're going to join too. We just got to coordinate those time zones and things. But we invite you to pick an affinity, a group that you're interested in, or pick a stretch. Pick a growth point. And so all of that is available on our website. You can read the description of the cohorts there. Well, that ends today's conversation. I'm so glad you joined us, and I'm just going to invite you to be with us next time for Discipleship Conversations. God bless you as we disciple and grow together.